everyone. Good afternoon. It's good afternoon for me. I'm sitting in Wiltshire at home, and my name is Rosie Goldsmith, and I'm really, really pleased to welcome you all to the first ever live session on Swiss publishing and translation. We'd like to thank the Swiss Arts Council, Pro Helvetia, for their support, and Publishers Without Borders for hosting this session. Together with my co-chair, and who in fact is co-founder of Publishers Without Borders, Emma House, we're delighted to be joined by four fantastic publishing panelists. So first up, we have Daniel Kamper, who's owner of Kamper Verlag. And Daniel is normally the publisher is sitting in Zurich. Are you in Zurich, Daniel?
Yes,
you're in Zurich. That's reassuring to know. And then also in Switzerland, and normally Edition Zoe is sitting in Geneva, is that correct?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yannick Stiasny is from Edition Zoe, the main French publishing house in Switzerland. And Yannick is an editor at Zoe and specializes in international literature. From the UK, we have two publishers as well. We have Juliette Maybe, who is the publisher at One World Publications, which she founded with her husband in 1986. Now, Juliette is a fantastic supporter of literature in translation, in person and in publishing, one of our favorite people. One World recently published the Swiss-German thriller Peter Beck, and his novel is called Damnation. And another outstanding supporter of international fiction in the UK is Francois von Hürtler, who is co-founder and publisher of Bitter Lemon Press, which is now 15 years old, same age as Francois, obviously, and specializes in crime fiction. Francois is himself Swiss French, and he is in Switzerland at the moment, but he lives mainly in the UK and has already published a handful of very excellent Swiss writers in English. So welcome all of you. I'm not going to give long introductions to each of you. If you, our audience, are really interested in their publishing houses and in them, we on our website are going to provide bios and links to their publications, also links to Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council, where you can read about promotion and publishing and translation grants, all the useful things you need. So you can check onto our website, which is www.eurolitnetwork.com. Now, to the matter in hand, I'm going to talk first of all to our two Swiss publishers, because we want to give an overview of what the Swiss publishing scene looks like, as this is our first seminar about Swiss publishing. It's a small country. We know that, 9 million people. It's home to a very healthy crop of authors and booksellers and publishers. And it speaks 4 different official languages. So German is the main language, spoken by about 2/3 of the population, then French, and then Italian, and then a language which I don't master, I can speak the other 3, but not this one, is called Romansh. And it is spoken by 0.5% of the population, but it is an official language. Now, I'm going to ask both Daniel, enough of me, let's hear from Daniel and Yannick. So both of you, is Swiss publishing unique? Let's go to Daniel first as the largest language group, Swiss-German language group. Daniel, is it unique, and how unique is it?
So I don't think it's unique. As you said, it's a multilingual country. That's, of course, a kind of, there's several multilingual countries, but that's kind of interesting. It's small, so we have a small home market, so we actually need like a different market. The funny thing about the multilingual aspect is actually that I think you correct me from the other language centers, for instance, as we publish in German, our main market is Germany, so we cater for the German market, and Austria is, again, a little bit bigger market than Switzerland. So I think what is peculiar is actually it's a country with 4 languages, but normally we look at another bigger country next to us, which is like the main market. So what makes it not unique but interesting and sometimes hard is it's a very expensive country. So Zurich is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So that's the first question people ask me from Germany always when they see that we are based in Zurich. They say, how do you do? Everything's so expensive. How do you manage? Because you make most of your money in Germany. and you earn by selling books in euro. And of course, our staff are paid in Swiss francs and with the Swiss salaries. So that's a major issue. How do we cope with that? And I think that's it. Publishing is nearly the same everywhere, I think, and it's a tough business. I always say it used to be difficult to make good money with good books, and I think now it's even difficult to make good money with bad books, which is like nice, but it's it's a tough business, isn't it?
Well, does that make Swiss books more expensive? It's obviously a more expensive country. We all know that. But are books more expensive?
No, they're not, because of course we maybe a little bit, but not really, because our main market is Germany. And if our books would be more expensive than books in Germany, then of course we would have a big problem. Sometimes you might look at prices like for like a book that's the main market is Switzerland, and of course there are publishers in Switzerland who cater for the home market. But these are like, I think it's fair enough, we don't do. So we, of course, can't make our books more expensive than German publishers, because then we would lose our main market.
Absolutely. Now, Yannick, let's look at the Swiss French publishing market as well, which is obviously much smaller because the language group is much smaller. But you've also got a big neighbour. You've got France next door. So how does it work for publishing in Switzerland from the French publisher's point of view?
It's quite the same thing as Daniel just said, because we in this French part of Switzerland, we are 1.5 million people. So we are very small markets, and we have just next to the border, the France with 60 million people. So it's the main market for us, with Canada, Quebec, and Belgium. So we are.
So Canada and Belgium.
Yeah.
Quebec. Yes. Yeah.
We work with Belgium, where there is the same kind of situation with people speaking French and people speaking Dutch. And in Canada, we have the Quebecois and the English-speaking Canada. And like in these different countries, we do not share the same way of working in the publishing world, like between the German-speaking Swiss publisher and the French-speaking Swiss publisher. We in Suisse Romande, we are more influenced by France and the way of doing in France.
If a French-speaking Swiss author wants to be published, would they prefer to be published in France, where there's a much bigger market, or would they be happy to be published by you?
Well, it depends, because most of people in Switzerland knows better the French publishing houses like Gallimard, for example. But the French publishing houses don't really know the situation in Switzerland. So if you, as an author, you are published in Switzerland by a Swiss publisher, you probably will be better followed by your publisher, because it's your country, and most of the readership in Switzerland, in Suisse Romande, like reading people from the region. So I can quote Joël Dicker, for instance, because in Switzerland he became a true literary hero now.
Well, Joël Dicker, I have to say, is one of Emma's favourites. So you said the right thing mentioning his name.
But well, we can propose for the Swiss writers a knowledge of the local situation. But about this, the French and Swiss situation, we, as Daniel said, have to work with the rules, the French rules. For instance, the retail prices of the book are based on the euros prices, because if we sell our books too expensive, like on the Swiss market that should be, it should be complicated to be competitive with the French resellers.
That does mean, I mean, you're talking about the French and the German markets, obviously, but we should, by rights, have representatives also from the Italian, Swiss publishing, and also the Romansh. And we all know, publishers there. It's just a matter of, not being able to fit more of you on the screen. But if we look at all of you together, do you collaborate? Do the French and the Germans and the Italian, the Romansh publishing thing, do you collaborate within Switzerland? And how do you do that? Daniel?
Well, I'm afraid to say that actually collaboration is not really kind of heavy, because as Yannick said, like the people from Geneva, they look at Paris, we look at Berlin, and the Ticino publishers look at Milano or Rome. And of course, they are kind of course, Pro Helvetia is like the Swiss Arts Council is kind of supporting this, that kind of Swiss writers are translated into another national language, and there are supports and subsidies and money for that. And of course, there are kind of meetings in between, but not like it's not very. I think it's not crucial for us. So we have the tendency to look at our main market, and I certainly know many of my colleagues in Germany, but I don't know a lot of my colleagues in Switzerland from another language part. But of course, I know all my Swiss-German counterparts here in Zurich or in Basel or in Bern, wherever. So, so I'm afraid the answer would be no. It's not a very heavy collaboration between the publishers of the different language.
It's fascinating because you said, of course, it isn't different from any other publishing market. But having myself worked with the Swiss Arts Council for quite a few years, I do see there are quite a few differences actually, and I think it's fascinating here too that, for instance, the French, the German, and the Italian markets themselves have been really badly hit by COVID-19 and book sales, massive drops in revenue and so on. Has that then impacted you in Switzerland? Yannick, I'll ask you about the French market. What kind of impact have you had during the COVID-19 pandemic? Has it been difficult for you?
Yeah, because we experienced a fall in the sales, but different situations between Switzerland and France. Because in Switzerland there was not a total lockdown, so some of bookshop managed to keep on selling books, but by e-shopping. The sales were not so important, but they existed. While in France, the lockdown was total. Even Amazon chose not to continue to sell books, to focus on more crucial goods.
Do you mean that, just to be clear, did Amazon stop selling books in France?
Yeah, during the lockdown.
But not for, it started again, I think. I think it was for a short time.
Yeah.
Also in the UK. It didn't last very long, but so people weren't reading as many books as well. They weren't buying as many books and weren't reading as many books. Is that correct?
Yeah. And when the things started again, it was like Christmas in spring, when May, the lockdown was over in half May. A lot of people came back to bookshops and bought a lot of books. And now, since maybe 1 month, is slowly going back to normal. And now the issue and the objective is to see how will be the rentrée littéraire, which is a very important event in France and Suisse romande, which is all the new release in August and September, with all the literary prizes after.
Yes, I mean, I should imagine that all the different timescales have been changed now for everything. Book festivals, book trade fairs, everything has just changed. So even le rentrée littéraire may be different this year too. Daniel, just one last question to you before we invite very patient Francois and Juliette sitting there. But it's really important, I think, to have this overview of the Swiss scene. Is that obviously the Swiss German market is the biggest in Switzerland, and the German market is the biggest outside Switzerland of the ones that you work with. Has that then had a massive impact on your company and your book trade in Swiss Germany during the pandemic, particularly. How bad has it been?
Well, it's certainly not good. It's not catastrophic. It's not really bad because so in Germany, of course, there was a lockdown. Bizarrely, like in Berlin, not. Bookstores were open in Berlin, but somewhere else it were closed. Germany has a huge amount of small independent bookstores. So like there are around 3,000 bookstores in Germany. So it's a country where there's a lot of bookstores. And actually, so they're locally quite integrated. So people could even buy quite nicely and quite easily books in the neighborhood. So they didn't need Amazon, for instance. We even heard from a lot of small booksellers that actually they gained new customers, that it's tough for them because tough maybe a little bit from the turnover point of view, financial point of view, but also because they had to deliver the books to their customers. So they had to pack packages, they had to go and deliver books with their bicycle, for instance. So it was a physical tough movement for them, but the financial strains are quite okay. So in Germany, like in the German part, mostly like the medium-sized and the big bookstore chains, they were hit most, and the small independent bookstores are doing quite well.
Very quickly, have you yourselves had any new releases in this period?
Oh yes,
you have.
We had like a week before the lockdown, we had like eight or nine new books coming out. Of course, it was a disaster for that, and like I think everyone is saying that we lost money, we lost turnover. Especially like new authors, not best-selling authors. The lockdown meant in a way that the readers were choosing the books, and like small independent literary publishers, they need the bookseller to make sure that unknown new books are sold to the readers. So all the publishers who had bestseller running, they were like lucky. But if you publish new authors, we had like one German first novel, and it was just published like a few weeks before the lockdown, and all the book premiere, the readings were cancelled. So it is a huge disaster for her and for us also. So everyone is suffering, but I think compared to restaurant owners, bar owners, etc., it's still decent, and we're still optimistic. But of course, for us, we don't have like this French system of la rentrée. A bit, yes, but it's not as big and as public. But for us,
fair coming up there, so maybe there's
different. No, I think everybody's saying that the Christmas sales season is going to be crucial. If there's a second wave coming in, if the Christmas sales are getting hit, then every publisher and every bookstore is going to be in deep, deep trouble.
Including Switzerland. Emma, over to you for a bit. There's loads of questions to ask you all, but it's so nice. I want to hear from Juliette. And Juliette, look at that, giving you a French name, Juliette and François.
So Juliette, I'm going to start with you. And you visited Switzerland last year on a UK delegation, meeting Swiss publishers. What did you learn on your trip about Swiss publishing?
I have to say it was absolutely the favourite editor's trip, organised by the Literary Swiss of Eurolit Network. But it was the favourite Swiss of all the favourite visit of all the editors who went on it. Not only was it incredibly well organised, and we went from Zurich to Geneva, and we did speed dating, we met authors, we were introduced to the Swiss Literature Society, and various publishers came on the trip as well. And it was just a fantastic 3 days, I think, way of getting to get a really good overview of the main players. A lot of small indies we met as well, and we met with a lot of authors. And we did a lot of swimming in the lakes, I think, every day. So that was the highlight. It was a heat wave. So it was literally from the airport in Zurich to the lake and went cooled off. So it was fantastic. I mean, I think we all wanted to move to Switzerland immediately, but sadly, here we are.
Did you learn anything surprising?
Well, I think the things that we learned, the things you've talked about a little bit here, which was the fact that for both the German and the French Swiss publishers, their main market is in their neighbouring country, and the disadvantages that has for them in terms of fixing prices that fit with not their own necessarily their own market, but with Germany and France as well. And what came across to us, and maybe I misunderstood, was that the Swiss German publishers had an easier job selling their books into Germany than the Swiss French publishers did selling their books into France. So although they also have Belgium and Quebec as markets, my understanding is that the Quebec government taxes books that are imported, so they have that disadvantage as well. So, but no, an incredibly vibrant market. We were particularly all impressed by the high quality of production and editorial, and I mean, some of the indie publishers we met in particular, people just fell in love with their books, and we're all trying to take copies home. So it was a really enriching experience, and some things about the market are very different from ours. You know, in terms of being able to do a series of small novellas with beautiful artwork and things, which a few of the indies did, and were different. But yeah, I think it was just a fantastic opportunity to meet and network, which is what publishing is really all about, especially for publishers who translate from other languages. I mean, our market is very difficult for translated fiction, but in Switzerland, I think some publishers, 70% of their list is translated from, often English, but from other languages, which is really rare over here. So yeah, very interesting trip.
Yeah, well, I mean, why do you think it's so difficult for foreign authors and foreign publishers to break into the UK market? I know we could have a whole session about this subject, but you know, I think in a nutshell,
I think there are two key problems. One is the cost of translation. Britain pays one of the highest levels of translation fees in the world, and we have one of the smallest markets. So you can see already there's a big problem there. And grants are not easy to get. Penn, obviously here, passes on grants on behalf of the Arts Council, but you normally have to commit to publishing the book before you find out if you can get a grant. So you get no grants, then you have a serious problem. And I know Switzerland is very generous as well, but so that's one problem is the sheer cost, and allied with a very small market. And the other problem is that if you look at the types of books that publishers abroad translate from English, they publish a lot of really high-profile commercial projects. Harry Potter, Jojo Moyes, these kind of books, which are hugely commercially successful in Britain, where the authors have built up a very big profile. That profile extends into Europe. In return, we tend to translate the literary books, because those are the ones we can get a grant for, and then necessarily lower profile in their own country, but also that profile normally hasn't extended to the UK. So we're choosing books that fill a need in our market for high quality literary writing, for example. But even if we go beyond that, which sometimes people do, and try and publish a very commercial novel, a book that's done well in Holland, in Germany, in France, in Scandinavia, selling multiple thousands of copies, when you bring that author into Britain, they're unknown. So it's not a commercial book in our market. So by the time you've paid a reasonable advance for it, that's commensurate with what the Europeans are paying as advances for those books that do well in their country, and then you pay the translation fee. When you come to sell it, it's often not selected by reviewers who review literary translated fiction because they're looking for the literary ones. It's not necessarily selected for the one big prize we have, which is the Booker International, because it doesn't fit their brief of looking for high quality literary translation. And the booksellers have never heard of the author. So you've got a huge problem here. And really, we need to train I'm not a bookseller, but we need our booksellers to be supporting a bigger variety of translated fiction. And we need a prize that also will also pick accessible, readable translated novels that you can persuade people that sometimes they're just quirky, they're unusual, they're different. And for me, that is enriching the reading experience for our readership in Britain. But unfortunately, as I say, the main interest for for the reviewers and for the prize judges is what I would call high literature. And that's, that doesn't tend to sell in big quantities in our bookshops. I mean, there are lots of things I think bookshops could do about it, but they have to make a living as well. So, and now because of the pandemic, the pyramid for books has become steeper. So fewer books are selling more copies, and the rest are selling much, much less. So if you're already high profile before March, like the winner of the Booker Prize or what have you, you're selling a lot through the lockdown. Not so much on Amazon because they stopped selling in Britain and America, but particularly in Britain. But so it's become even more difficult to publish authors who are not well known, because the author profile is what booksellers are confident will draw the buyer into the store, and they'll recognize the author and they'll buy the book. So author profile is a big problem for us with translation.
That's fascinating.
It's a very big subject.
No, it's a mass. Okay, so we could have a whole session talking about this.
I'm happy to rant about it any day, because my heart is in translated fiction, but unfortunately it's becoming more and more expensive and more difficult to sell, and those two things make it really tough here.
Yeah. Francois, you're passionate about literature and translation as well, and we know that Switzerland is your home for some of the time, and you're indeed sitting there now. I mean, what's your experience with all things Swiss publishing?
Swiss publishing, well, for us is a great source of books, and because of the very generous subsidies you get from Paul Helvetia and the minimum administrative work that goes with them, we love doing books from Switzerland. And so we've done both from the German and from the French. And I mean, Juliet's totally right. It is a difficult thing to be in translation, given that you pay two artists, a translator and an author. But one can manage. I think you just have to stay very small. And in our case, more than half our turnover is in the US. So that's our Germany or our France. We have to spread our costs around by selling abroad. And that seems to work fine.
How do we know more about Swiss authors in the UK, do you think?
In our particular case, we've published 10 novels from Switzerland, but it's 10% of our turnover the last 10 years, since we're so small. We have a fairly narrow remit. We tend to focus on noir and crime, and so we don't range very far. But I think there by definition will be more, especially as other countries cut back on their artistic subsidies, and the Swiss keep providing them. So I think that will be an edge going forward. But in a funny way, the way we find out a lot about Swiss authors is by reading French and German newspapers and their review pages, which can be wonderful, like in Le Monde or in German newspapers. And very often the Swiss are published not just in Zurich and Geneva, but abroad as well, and get a lot of review traction in the big markets, which allows us to see them.
Could I jump in there and ask Daniel and Yannick as well? I mean, how important is it for you, for Swiss publishers, to be published in the UK? And what kind of books are you trying to publish in English? I suppose not just the UK, but English, in other words. Daniel.
But you mean like books that are translated, that I would sell the rights?
Yeah, how important is the UK and the American market for you as a Swiss publisher?
As Judith said, of course we buy translation from a lot of languages, but of course the UK-US market is very interesting and important to look for rights, to look for authors, and a few of our best-selling authors are from the UK or the US. We have a big crime list where, of course, for instance, we published Louise Penny, the Canadian crime author, which is the best-selling author for us in Germany, or like Michael Connelly. So, of course, we look for talent there, we look for rights. And but, of course, we being like a smaller company, we try to look out for niches, to look out for languages, for markets where maybe the big commercial players are not really interested. For instance, we published the whole oeuvre of Olga Tokarczuk, who won the Nobel Prize last year, and we were the fifth German publisher, like German language publisher.
Yes.
Yeah, so we were the fifth German language publisher of Olga Tokarczuk in Germany, because the big publishing houses, they published 1 or 2 books and then they let her go, and so we always look as a small one to look new talent, to look affordable talent, but also to look what the big ones are not pursuing, or authors and great authors that they're just not continuing publishing. And I think the Corona crisis will actually, Juliet said something about the pyramid. I think the big commercial publishers will get more and more commercial, and there's going to be less and less space on their list for literary titles and for translations, and so that's also an opportunity for us. And but we have a lot of authors from the UK and US.
Now I remember where I met you. I met you at Frankfurt Book Fair behind a pile of books by Olga Tokarczuk. I remember so well because it was such a massive success for you. You did something so brilliant there to spot her.
It was a.
She's incredible. She's incredible. We all know. But Yannick, is it important for Editions Zoe to publish in the UK? Is it important for you to have those links with the English market, particularly our market?
For the foreign rights, from a French point of view, to be translated into English in UK or USA is very rare and very precious, because on the international scene, if you have a translation of one of your novels or texts into English, you can you suddenly can make it read by a lot of different publishers throughout the world. So, for instance, we in February 2020, Winter in Sokcho by Elisa Soi-du-Sapin was published by Dawn Books in the UK, and the novel was published in France 4 years ago. And this new translation is really a booster for us on the international scene. We have
it's translated by Anissa Higgins, and in fact we've been helping to promote that book, as you know, because it's such a wonderful book, and Elisa Soi-du-Sapin and Anissa are also quite wonderful. So, and that's an interesting case in point, really, because it is about the fact that I think because Swiss publishing is becoming better known here, or Swiss authors are gradually becoming better known, I don't know whether you'd agree, there is a sort of broader open market. I mean, you're nodding, which is very kind, but if you agree, what do you think, Yannick? I mean, and do things like the festivals and book trade fairs and so on, do they help?
Well, you mean in Switzerland or international?
Yeah, generally. I mean, generally, you had a massive success with children's literature at Bologna last year. I know Swiss literature was a focus at Bologna, but generally, I mean, things are changing, of course. Now, these trade fairs are not happening in the same way, and book festivals have been cancelled everywhere. But you know, what actually helps this kind of ecosystem build up? Because I think Emma would agree that's probably one of the most essential things for any success in the book trade.
Well, for us, I would say more than the book fair, for the international success or visibility is the international publisher a few years ago didn't really look at the Swiss-French production, because we're so small part of Switzerland. Maybe the German part is more internationally recognized, but the French part was not. And when we develop our visibility on the French market, I think international publishers see our successes in France and say and wonder who are Editions Zoe, so let's have a look on it, and they discover our production, and so that makes our books more visible on the international scene.
Just to finish off that, and then I'll hand over to Emma, because I'm sorry, but Juliet, after your trip to Switzerland. And Francois, were there any books you really caught your interest that you thought, as a result of that? I mean, what is it that's going to help? Because it is, it's still early days for, our knowledge in this country of Swiss authors.
Yeah, I mean, we looked very carefully at Sybil Berg's book, which I know was a huge success in Switzerland and probably further abroad. But we just felt that once we translated it into English, it would still be very difficult to promote in the English language market. So we chickened out. But one of the publishers we met was La Joie de Lire. And we felt that actually focusing perhaps on children's books, which gets a lot of support from the Swiss Literature grants, and would be one way forward, because we're quite keen to do and have done several children's books in translation. They're shorter, so that helps us a lot with the cost. So that's an area we're looking at, and we've just got a new children's editor starting in a month or so. And one of the things she's very interested, she speaks like 4 languages, which is one of the reasons we chose her, including French, German, and Russian. So one of the things we're particularly keen to do is to develop our children's list in translation. And I think in the same way that Kairini Press focuses on novellas to try and keep the cost down, I think for us, I mean, obviously we're interested in anything that we can sell, but I think we're slightly hampered by languages. So we now have in-house French, Spanish, German, Arabic, Persian, Russian, and Italian. But I don't speak any of them. So at the end of the day, I still have to decide for my literary fiction list what to do. But I think it would be very helpful having a German, French, Russian-speaking children's editor. So that's one of the reasons we've hired her.
There are lots of those around.
So we're very keen to really bring translation into the children's market as much as we can.
And Françoise, what more do you think we can do to raise the profile of Swiss publishing and Swiss authors in the UK?
I think we just need to get more publishers to do more Swiss books, but I'm not sure it's going to come from outside. But one thing I certainly would encourage people to do is to look at Pro Helvetia, not just as a source of money, but as a source of great ideas, and in a way as a wonderful scout. I mean, we talk to them very frequently and are given fantastic reports, intellectual analyses of books from them. So it's not just writing checks. Any publisher should have a dialogue, either on the French side or the German-speaking side of Pro Helvetia, and ideas will come. And of course, as an Anglophone publisher, as soon as it is known that you are seeking to do translation, there will be no shortage of supply. The problem is finding the time to read things. And yes, you need someone to read German, to read French. But supply is unlimited. I think every author in the world wants to be in English. From Cuba to Iraq to whatever, it's sort of the language of the empire. And like Yannick says, it's a passport to getting your book read by publishers everywhere in the world once you're in English. So the advances you have to pay can be very modest. To them, they see this as a bridge to being much better known.
Yeah. And sort of like from that grants perspective, is there any kind of other government support that or any other support that could be given to publishers to encourage translation, do you think?
Well, we find the Arts Council has been extremely generous with us as well. So I'm going to spend all day thanking people that give us money. But between Pro Helvetia, if you're talking about Switzerland, and the Arts Council that's pushing for diversity, cultural diversity, it's really not a huge obstacle to get some help and say to reduce on average the cost of the translation by, I don't know, 60, 70%. And if you can do that, I think you have a model that might work, but you do have to stay lean and thin and not have fancy offices and lots of employees if your love is for translated fiction.
And Juliette, you learned a lot from your trip to Switzerland, and you know that's something else that we could encourage, is to go and visit Switzerland and see all the wonderful things that you saw on your trip. So Daniel, Yannick, if we were to come and visit Switzerland and to learn about the literary scene, what events would you recommend we come and take part in, and what do you recommend we do if we come to Switzerland?
Swim in the lake.
I can't recommend it highly enough.
We're going to relaunch Jean Rhys next year in Germany, and she said this wonderful sentence about all of writing is a huge lake. There are great rivers like Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, and then there are small rivers and like Jean Rhys, but all that matters is feeding the lake. So no, I think we're in this wonderful business where it's a small business, it's a tough business, but actually personal contacts are very important, and everybody knows that even if you at the end you decide if it's the book that you like or you can sell, but you look more into a book when you get it from an agent personally for 10 or 15 years, or from a friend, or from a publisher So it's in the end, it's all about personal connections. So more, if you invite more people to Switzerland to meet the publishers, if you invite more editors from other countries to come to Switzerland to meet people, in the end, it's about personal connections, and I think that's the most important thing, that actually they're interested in books and they're looking into books. Of course, as Francois said, you need a German, like for us, you need someone who can read German, or maybe like a chapter, a sample chapter is translated, or even the translation is funded. But it's about knowing other publishers and knowing their list.
And Yannick, you're sitting in Geneva and you have a book fair in Geneva. Is that something you'd recommend we all come and visit?
Yeah, I would recommend it, but this year is complicated because of the lockdown, and it was cancelled in May. It will be reported next April and May, and there is a special edition this fall. So it's a great place to see what people read in Geneva, what people like, and you can meet all the publisher community from the Swiss Romande. There is another festival I could recommend, is Livre sur les Quais. It is in March, and it's in September, because it's just set at maybe 5 meters from the Lac Léman. So sometimes you want to have your book signed by an author, but he is not here because he is swimming in the lake just next to the table.
I was there last year. It's so true.
Yeah. And it's there is a lot of people and readers there, and the Geneva Book Fair and Livre sur les Quais, they gather authors from Switzerland, but also authors from France and all around the world, German part of Switzerland as well. So it's a nice place to see what happens in our region.
I've got to ask one question before we sort of open it up a little bit, but this is actually also a question from one of the Publishers Without Borders host, Simon de Jocas. And it's a really important question, because it's one, of course, that is occupying all of us everywhere at the moment, and that is about the emphasis on diversity and BAME and women and so on too. And I just wonder how these issues, this explosion of change across the world, is being reflected in Swiss literature and publishing, because it's completely changing everything here in the UK. And I wonder whether the whole diversity issue, BAME and so on, it is impacting you as well, Daniel.
Well, yes and no, because we are a small company, and we, in a way, I'm very egoistic, and I publish what I like, and I'm not kind of trying to follow kind of trends, because there's going to be, and actually you see this already with the big corporate publishing houses surfing on this wave, which is good in a way, but it's like the traditional thing. And actually, I just discussed it with a former publisher, and she said, of course, we have to publish more books by Afro-American authors, etc., which is fair enough, yes. But then I told her, but but this already happened like in the 60s in Germany, and everybody forgot about this, you know. For instance, a big publishing house republished James Baldwin, and I'm really happy about this, and I'm sad also because I tried to get the rights and I was a bit late, but James Baldwin was published by Rowohlt in the 60s and to huge acclaim, and he was a big star in Germany. There was a huge avalanche of books about the situation of Afro-American people in the US. So it's nothing really new, and I think it's nothing really new in Germany or in the German language part and everywhere. But of course, the issue is very important. And we, for instance, we published a short story collection by Kathleen Collins 2 years ago, and I'm really happy that actually this question is now much more on the news, because I had this feeling that actually no, like the German audience would be not really interested by an Afro-American author and by this issue. And now it's on the map, which is good.
But what about Yannick? What about the actual Swiss publishing scene? How diverse is publishing in Switzerland? You know,
we as Éditions Zoé, we mainly publish French literature, but we have also for a translation collection called Écrits d'ailleurs, and we're not positioned with BLM, but we have different authors who are, because this collection is like a prolongation of the Swiss identity. With 4 different languages, we wanted to publish authors from Commonwealth with question of colonialism and indigenous or identities. So we published different authors from South Africa, Jamaica or Caribbean. We have also authors from Caribbean diaspora in Canada. And recently we published an author from this community called David Chariandi. He came from, his parents came from Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, and he was born in Vancouver and Toronto, and he has to deal with this question of racism and xenophobia while he's a native Canadian, and so he writes about it and this question. And we published this book.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, sorry to interrupt, but I know there'll be other questions coming as well too. But the one message that doesn't seem to get out about Switzerland, which is something I'm fascinated by, is that it is a very diverse country. I mean, there's very high immigration, and your authors are. I mean, I know a number of authors like Dana Grigorcia and various other authors who are from Yugoslav or Hungarian or Romanian backgrounds, and they've been really well integrated into the Swiss publishing scene. So it seems sort of interesting that this image of Switzerland as being, you know, white and male and you know, just very rich, it's still not changing. Daniel, I don't know whether you want to say something, or Francois.
No, you're right. Like for instance, Zurich, I think is one of the most. It's a city where the foreign population is huge. It's like 30 or 40%. Actually, I'm not Swiss, so there's a lot of. There's a lot of people.
Are you German? Are you German?
No, I'm from Luxembourg. It's even smaller and richer, you know. So,
you're Swiss, you see. Being from somewhere
actually, you know, they when I came to Switzerland to study, the first room I could find as a student, there was a little poster only for Swiss. Now it would be forbidden because there's an anti-racism law. So and I went there and I said, I'm from Luxembourg. It's even smaller, you know. So and I got the room. But of course, actually, there's a lot of not Swiss people working in Swiss publishing. When you look at Swiss publishers, there's a huge amount. For instance, Darjani is the biggest publisher around. I think they have more than 50% of people.
Diogenes is the largest Swiss publishing company. Isn't that correct? I think.
Yes, it's not the largest literary company, and I worked there for 20 years, and I think more than 50% of the staff is not from Switzerland, because they're catering also mainly the German market. So, but of course here on the panel we're mostly white, so that's really not good. But I think I'm waiting for, you know, there was a in the last 10 years, there was a lot of people from Eritrea coming to Switzerland. So it was one of the only countries where actually people from Eritrea could come to Switzerland. And so I'm waiting for the first novel by like we call them secondo, like this first generation who have parents from other countries, and I'm waiting for a novel by someone who was from Eritrea and who was kind of who came to Switzerland and who's going to write a novel. So that's certainly exciting. But as you said, Rosie, there are a lot of Swiss writers with a very diverse background, and I think it would be really hard to find a real Swiss person in Switzerland with no other connection from other countries. It's nearly impossible.
I'm sure in a little village somewhere where they speak only Romansh, they will disagree with you. That's very Swiss.
And look out, there's this wonderful essay by James Baldwin where he came in the 60s to a small village in the Alps, and he was the first black person that they saw, and he written an amazing essay, 20 pages. It's one of the most amazing essays about this issue, because of course he was writing his novel there, and he experienced it was tough.
I think he was in Louech-les-Bains.
Louech-les-Bains, Leukerbad, yes, absolutely.
That's where he went.
Well, it's indeed Leukerbad, where the festival takes place, or normally takes place, which I wasn't at this year. Emma, have we got any questions coming in?
So there is one question which I think is quite interesting, is whether there's any topic in books that could really unify and describe the Swiss soul, or any sort of like feeling at the moment that unifies the Swiss feeling. Yannick, is that one for you?
That's a tough
it's a tough question.
one.
I don't know, because there is so many influences in Switzerland, literary influences from France, from the local questions. I don't know if there is really something to unify the whole the Swiss touch.
It used to be Swiss guidebooks, but people aren't travel and guidebooks about the only thing that would cover the whole of Switzerland. But that's an interesting thing, because of course they aren't being published as much now too, because nobody's really traveling. So that's going to be a big drop in the market.
Yeah.
Maybe what we can observe is, as Switzerland is a very small country, people are passed out of Switzerland, so they travel and come back, and they often tell stories about what they saw outside and what they see inside, and they compare. Maybe it can be a important topic from Swiss literature.
Yeah, and it's been interesting having the German and the French viewpoint, and we've had a great Italian publisher watching in and talking about what the Italian experience might be, and commenting on how the lakes might be a little bit cold for Italians and they prefer the mountains. So Francois, where you are, should we all come and visit you in Verbier up in the mountains?
Definitely. There are so many bits of Switzerland that no one goes to.
Right.
So it's very easy to escape and find secret villages or even cathedrals and crazy little restaurants. So you should definitely all come. And then
the wine.
On the way out. What?
Swiss wine, Francois.
They've also made big progress.
It's amazing.
People tend to poo-poo them, but like in the Valais where we are here, the last 15 years have seen just a fantastic increase in quality in their red wines. They used to be, have a glass of fondant and, that's all and mix it with lemonade while you're at it. But in the meantime, there's some fantastic Swiss wines.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't think of anything better than lakes, mountains, Swiss wine, Swiss chocolate, and Swiss literature.
Absolutely.
I think we should move on to our book recommendations, and I wonder if we could all go round and sort of like recommend one Swiss author we should be reading right now. So Juliet, I think this is a good chance for you to plug your Swiss crime novelist.
That's right. We published Peter Beck's first crime novel, Damnation, and I believe we have his sequel, Corrosion, to come. But we published the first one. I mean, it's been difficult to sell. The crime market, you tend to have to publish several books to build up a reputation, even when you're writing in English. So when you're translating, you really need to stick with an author and publish several of their books in translation. So, but yeah, it's a fantastic sort of detective story. The main character works in Swiss banking, so couldn't be more Swiss.
Yannick.
Apparently, we forgot to mention cheese. Does he eat cheese, though, the main character?
I'm sure he eats chocolates at least, yeah.
All those cliches.
So-
Daniel, yeah? Or Francois? Or who's got another book to recommend?
Well, I mean, the list is endless and could be great fun. But the book that we're the most proud that we've published is Jacques Chessay's Un Juif pour l'exemple, A Jew Must Die, which was not a title that was easy for us to get the American sales force, for instance, to accept. But it's a wonderful 120-page book about Switzerland during World War II. So that's the book that I'm most proud of and would recommend to anyone. But outside of our little world of London-based publishing, I would say people should read Blaise Cendrars. And if they're going to start with one, they should start with Sutter's Gold. It's been translated. It's an incredible story about the gold rush in California and what it did to poor John Sutter, who ended totally impoverished. But those are two things I would recommend.
Well, we'll definitely be including this list in our write-up after we finished. So, Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, one of our authors is Hans-Jörg Schertenleib, and he's written a small book called Palast der Stille, Palace of Silence. And we said why you should come to Switzerland. He's Swiss. He has a small house also in Maine. So you have mountains, forest, and cold water. Why did you move to Maine? He has everything in Switzerland. I published that in January, and it's a kind of memoir. It's a book about writing, but it's a book also, that's why the title is Palace of Silence, about hiding in a small cabin in the forest. So he decided for a personal lockdown before the lockdown, and actually it's the only book actually where we had an advantage during the Corona crisis, during the COVID crisis, because people said that's the book of the moment, because someone is alone in the house thinking. And I think the COVID crisis gave a lot of people a time to work less, to relax, to stay at home, to think about things and to be still. And so the book is all about that. And it's a very practical book. He, of course, went to visit Concord and went to on the paths of Thoreau. So it's a small book, but with a huge impact. So it's called Palast der Stille by Hans-Jörg Schertenleib. And he was already published once by Melville House with a novella several years ago. So there's an English book already by him in the market.
Fantastic. And Yannick?
Yeah, I could say a word about an author who we published her debut novel last year. She's Gabriela Zalapi, and her novel is Antonia, like the name. I think she's a representative of our international DNA because she is Swiss, but she is also British and Italian, and she now lives in Paris.
Wow.
And yeah, and what is interesting is the language she used. She writes in French, but it's a very simple and direct way of writing, because the author has different languages in her brain, and so she has to deal with all of these influences. And the story is very short. It's a journal from a woman in the 60s. She is married in Palermo in Italy, and she is unhappy because she is in a forced marriage. And in 100 pages, you discover how she manages to get over her situation and to create a new life for her. It's before the sexual revolution, So yes, interesting on the literary plan, on a historical plan. Very good novel, Antonia by Gabriela Zalapi.
Fantastic, thank you. And Rosie, you've done a lot with Swiss literature and Swiss authors. What would you recommend for us?
Well, I always say Heidi because I adore Heidi. Johannes Firi. I could read Heidi every single day, as they say, till the cows come home, and they always do in Heidi, which is wonderful. It was one of the most important books for me when I was a child. And also the interesting thing is about Heidi is that she grew up in a region called the Graubünden, which is where they speak lots of dialect and so on. It's a fascinating area. Now, Heidi, I can always read. Another author, because we've been celebrating French Book Week this week, and we've not been focusing on Swiss and French literature and poetry and so on too. I've discovered as a result an author called Pascale Kramer. And she's published by Flammarion in France. She is actually Swiss-French. And she's written a book called Une Famille. And this is, and I've read it in French. She's an exceptional writer. She's published quite a lot in English actually as well. And I'm not going to even tell you the story because you can look on our website, because I did an interview with Pascale Kramer just a few days ago on Monday. You can check it all out on the website. And all the other wonderful French material that we have. I also want to say thank you to Emma, because before she gives us her recommendation, because Emma has been amazing this week as well. We've got a lovely team behind us, creating all the European Literature Network staff and the Literally Swiss and this French Book Week. It's been amazing. So thank you, Emma. And Emma, what is your recommendation? I think I know.
Yeah, mine's very cliche, but I read it before the TV series came out and I absolutely adored it, which was The Truth of the Harry Kubert Affair. And it's one of those rare books that when I watched the TV series, I thought it was just as good. But the book is terrific. So if you haven't read the book, I would recommend it. But one subject we haven't spoken about on our panel really is about Swiss poetry, as you mentioned, Rosie. And yesterday, I think we featured about 15 French poets, some of which were Swiss. And I think I'm really looking forward to exploring a bit more Swiss poetry. I think there's some really good stuff there that has been published in translation by some of our independent publishers here in the UK. So I'm looking forward to exploring that as well.
And the worst thing of all is that we can't be together, because as Daniel and all of you have been saying, the best way for any of us to operate is to actually be together. It's all face to face and so on. So this is a small way of us meeting, and it's really wonderful to see you all. And I really hope we can meet properly and continue these conversations, because I think Switzerland is still a well-kept secret as far as publishing goes, and we want to know some of your secrets and share them with the rest of the world and get more Swiss authors translated and published in English. Remember that we'll put the details of, how if anybody's watching and wants to find out more about Swiss publishing and promotion and translation, it's the Swiss Arts Council Pro Helvetia. We'll put the information on our website on the European Literature Network.
But thank you all for joining us from Zurich, Verbier, and from Geneva, and from us in the UK. It's been really fascinating. We've really enjoyed it. And thank you, Juliette, as well, for joining from your office in London.
Indeed, yes.
Good luck.
Thanks so much, everyone. Au revoir.
Thank you.
A presto a tutti. Ciao. Bye.
Ciao, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.